So about a year ago, I introduced the channel to this watch here. The Shanghai Watch was once known as the Rolex of China because back in the 1960s and 1970s, no watches were imported from outside of China. So if you did have a Shanghai watch, this was kind of a status symbol for those who owned it. Now compared to today's standards of watches, this watch here isn't really anything special. The materials are quite cheap, the movement is quite crude, and the design is pretty generic and it doesn't really stand out compared to other watches. But this watch does have quite a bit of history behind it, and it was only about $40 on AliExpress. And I concluded that video talking about whether or not this watch is a fake or not. And I concluded that maybe this watch has some genuine parts inside of it, but my best guess is that some parts, like the case for example, may be reproduced or may be a fake. So this watch, I concluded, was kind of a hybrid between the two. And after making that video, I didn't have any plans to revisit the Shanghai watch because I feel like I told its story to the best of my ability, and it is hard to find a genuine Shanghai watch that's not from AliExpress. That is until I found this watch here, and I believe this watch is 100% a genuine Shanghai watch. Now this Shanghai watch here is not from AliExpress, it's not from eBay, it was actually from my dad's closet. He was cleaning out his old stuff and this actually belonged to his father. So this is actually my grandfather's Shanghai watch, and we're guessing that he purchased it probably around the 1980s or so. Now when my dad first pulled this watch out of the closet, it wasn't in the best shape, there was no strap, the crystal was scratched up quite a bit, and the watch was only ticking intermittently because we later found out that there was a problem with the balance wheel. Now thankfully we were able to take it to a Chinese watch shop and get it fixed up, and I was able to buff out most of the scratches using Polywatch. And the difference between the two is actually quite big. Thankfully this is acrylic crystal, so most of the scratches came off, but I'll pull up a photo just to compare the two, and you can see that it was really hard to even see the time with the scratched up crystal, but with just a few minutes with the Polywatch I was able to get out those scratches. And in terms of information about this watch, my dad told me that by the time the 1980s hit, Shanghai Watch wasn't as reputable as it was before, as China began to import watches from Switzerland. So by the time my grandfather had purchased this watch wasn't as prestigious as it used to be. And aside from that tidbit of information, I really don't know much about this watch. I don't know the model number or the movement number. If we flip to the back, all we can really get from this is that this was made at the Shanghai Watch factory. So I thought for this video what would be interesting is to compare this genuine Shanghai watch with the one from AliExpress. We'll see what the differences are, what the similarities are, and then perhaps we can conclude whether or not that AliExpress Shanghai watch is genuine or fake. So now you can see we have both watches side by side now, with the AliExpress one on the left and my grandfather's on the right. And we'll start off the comparison by talking about the differences in the dial, and more specifically we'll talk about the text. You can see on the left hand side, the Shanghai, it's bolded, italicized, and it's underlined, whereas the one on the right is simply printed. And the one on the left, they have the applied logo at the top. Both of them actually have it, but the one on the left, it feels a little bit thicker compared to the one on the right. And then when we go down to the 6 o'clock position, you can see on the left, it says Fang Zhen 19 Zuan, which means anti-magnetic 19 joules. And it says the same for the one on the right, but this one is in English. And then finally, when we go all the way down to the 6 o'clock position by the markers, this one says China made on the right, but the one on the left does not say anything. And I kind of like how this one says China made, because it's almost proud that this is made in China, whereas the one on the left, it feels more generic because it doesn't say where it's actually made from. Now in terms of comparing the hands and indices between both watches, I feel like it's not an easy one-to-one because these watches are different models, but I will say that there is one similarity, and that's in the seconds hand. You can see that both of them have the lollipop style hand, and I will say that the watch on the left, the AliExpress watch, that lollipop red part in the middle, that circle looks a lot more new compared to the one on the right. Now that could be because the AliExpress watch is using newer or unused parts, whereas my grandfather's watch is older and it was used, so it kind of makes sense that it doesn't look like it's in pristine condition. And I will say that in general, the AliExpress watch, the dial does feel like it's in better condition. It looks newer, it looks cleaner, but again, I feel like this should be expected for a watch that was sold as brand new versus a watch that was used and then put in storage for a few decades. Now with all that being said, does this mean that the AliExpress watch is fake? Well, not necessarily, because even though the dials are different, if you look online, there's actually quite a few different Shanghai watch designs throughout their history. So just because the logo looks different and the text looks different compared to this one, that doesn't necessarily mean that the one on the left is a fake. So instead, let's move forward with the comparison. We have both watches on their sides now, and you can see that both watches have a domed acrylic crystal. You can also see that the case shape is pretty similar and they both have that level of high polish that honestly isn't the best quality. What I do find interesting is that the watch on the right, which is my grandfather's watch, it does have a signed crown with the logo of Shanghai Watch, whereas the one on the left just has a generic blank crown. Now let's flip over to the back, and you can see that both watches have that multifaceted case back. The one on the left though, the AliExpress one, is a lot more complicated. Here it says Shanghai Shubao Cheng. We have some numbers and some Chinese characters. This one here has a Shanghai Watch logo, and then it just says Shanghai Watch Factory ZSH. So again, this could just be a difference between different models. Maybe this model just has a more complicated case back, but I will say that maybe it's because this is high polish, but this one just feels a lot more fake compared to the one on the right. And the final thing that I want to compare between these watches is the movement. Now both watches are a hand-winding mechanical movement with a power reserve of about 25 to 30 hours. Both watches claim to have 19 jewels, and the beat rate between the two are the same. Now it would be nice to open up the case back and look at the movement, but I'm not confident in my abilities to do that. So what I will compare between the two is something that I find interesting when I wind the watch. So we'll start with the AliExpress watch, and what I notice is that when you wind the watch and you let go, there's kind of this kickback. I'll try one more time and try and slow it down. You can see that when I wind it and let go, it kind of walks back, or it kind of snaps back a little bit. And I've never had a watch do that before until I met the Shanghai Watch. Now, if I look at the genuine Shanghai Watch, my grandfather's watch, it does the same thing too. So if I go ahead and wind it and I let go, again, it kind of snaps back, which I find very interesting. I've only seen that happen with the Shanghai Watch movements. So let me know in the comments down below if you know any other watches that do this thing as well. Alright, so now that we've compared the two, what can we conclude? Well, if we use my grandfather's watch as the control, I'm still quite confident that at least some parts of this AliExpress watch are genuine Shanghai Watch parts. I'm still not entirely certain which parts or how many of them are genuine, but my gut feeling is that this watch here has some genuineness to it. But I'm also quite confident that some parts of this watch are fake or reproduced. Again, I'm not too sure exactly what. I am kind of suspicious about the dial especially, and the case back. I feel like it just feels too fake, or just, I don't know, too perfect in some senses. I do feel like the movement between these two, I do feel like this watch here, this AliExpress watch, might have a genuine movement in their hands. So if you are interested in buying a 100% genuine Shanghai watch, well, unfortunately this one is not for sale, and I wouldn't look at AliExpress because I do question the authenticity of some of their watches. If you look online, I think eBay is a little bit sketchy. There are some online stores that you can buy these Shanghai watches from, but they're a little bit expensive. You could look at some watch stores. I did go to a watch store in Chinatown in New York, and they did have some of these watches for sale. And of course, you could travel to China themselves and buy a watch. But again, there's so much chances of a fake. It's really hard to tell whether something is genuine or not. So I think I am quite lucky that I was able to get this watch and be quite confident, or fairly confident, that this is a 100% genuine Shanghai watch. But of course, I can't end off this video without doing a wrist shot, as well as my parting thoughts about this watch. And I will say that similar to the AliExpress Shanghai watch, this watch is in a lot of ways unremarkable. I think the design is quite plain, the finishing is industrial, the materials are quite cheap. That date window at the 3 o'clock, I will say, it reminds me of when you're a kid and you have to cut a hole out of a piece of paper and it's not done very well. That's what the date window reminds me of. So overall, from an objective standpoint, I probably couldn't sell this watch for more than $100 or $200. But that's not really the point. There's a lot of sentimental value to this watch. This is, first of all, a Chinese watch, and I'm Chinese. This is also my grandfather's watch, so it's survived for decades and decades. So I feel like that personal connection makes this a very priceless watch. And out of all the watches that I've owned, this one probably has the most history and the most connection to my family as well as my heritage. So even though Shanghai Watch isn't known as the Rolex of China anymore, to me, this watch is the Rolex of my collection. And on that note, thank you so much for watching. Subscribe for more videos, and as always, I'll see you guys next time.